Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Morning, Todd. Morning, Ken.
Good morning, Commissioner. Madam Chair.
Morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock. So at this time, we'll call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for June 10th, 2021. And we'll ask Mr. Sadlow, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. And updates to our joint calendar session, commissioners. Is there anything to add?
Chair, not unless anybody's going to the Archie Creek Fire Tour. That's next week, I think.
Commissioner Kula?
I don't believe that I am, but I would
Okay.
love the information if you could, Commissioner Bershauer.
It's not next week. It's the 25th of June. So I can certainly report back. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to public comment, and thank you to Carolina for forwarding those to us. We received a number of emails, and thank you for that. And thank you for everybody who wrote and took the time to weigh in. We'll move on to item E, which is our work session, and we're continuing our discussion of the ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan areas of priority. So commissioners, I know last week we were looking at percentages and trying to move some of the percentages from the original proposal, and wanted to check in and see if you had any further whittling down or any further revisions to that, and any suggestions about where we'll go with our next discussion. Because the last time we met, we were talking a little bit about moving some of those percentages closer to the economic impact, because it did contain so many of the social services. So Ken, did you want to add anything in for additional information you've received up until now?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to, let me see if I can share here. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Everybody can see the spreadsheet? All right. So just kind of a recap on, okay, I'm not muted. Just a recap where last week's discussion, you'll see that I plugged in the percentages based on, feedback from the board. And so you'll see on this spreadsheet, I'm trying to use this workbook to kind of track the discussions and build it in, because, as the budget officer, I love spreadsheets and tracking numbers that way. So here we had, based on the discussions, what the 15% to the public health category, 33% to economic impacts, 14% to revenue loss, 33% to water and sewer infrastructure, and 5% to broadband infrastructure. And these are what the numbers look like. So based on, and I believe for today, we really wanted to further talk about economic impacts. Correct me if I'm mistaken on that. And so I did some work because, again, you have this summary that talks about all of the examples or potential criteria that could fall underneath that economic impact. There was some further guidance that was released from NACO that didn't necessarily bring more clarity to the guidance that was put out, but it did generalize some of the potential categories that fall underneath that negative economic impacts and how to use the funds. So using the guidance that we've reviewed or received from NACO, I'm not sure how many commissioners were on the call last Friday with AOC and with NACO. I was having technical issues, so I couldn't see the PowerPoint, and I was just having to follow along listening on the phone. But based on the categories that we've had in the NACO guidance and some of the discussions, and then also based on the discussions that the board had last week about some of the, and looking at the project submittals that were coming in, I did put that, so again, taking that 6.8 million that you had identified from the total ARPA allotment, and then trying to break that up into categories. And so what I had in my notes is childcare, small business, impacted industries, nonprofits, and workforce development were the kind of the main categories, at least that I took away from some of the discussions that were being had. And then also in looking at some of the requests or information that commissioners received prior to last work session. And I just kind of plug those, the nonprofit ones in here just as an illustration. But again, I think there's some more vetting and an application. We have a basic idea what it looks like. And I just put that in there just to demonstrate what this looks like. So I think the next part to kind of help facilitate discussions, and then also keeping in mind that Abisha is on the schedule, I believe, for the 24th to be making a presentation. And I know we have some discussions that are going to be specific around economic development, is to kind of help shape or place some guardrails to, again, that funnel as we start to filter through. If you wanted to then prioritize and apply percentages to that 6.8 million on what you would like to see with those programs, there's going to be some that, and I'm looking at like grant programs, if we're going to roll out small business grants or impacted industry grants, we have some basic framework that we could revisit and we could roll out pretty quickly. I would say the same thing goes with nonprofits. If we wanted to identify a percentage of those funds available for nonprofit grants, we could do a formal solicitation or you could look at what's been presented today. There's a couple different ways you can approach that, but do some a grant program where we do a solicitation, we do reviews, we prioritize, identify the funding, everything comes back, we enter into grant agreements, and we start releasing the funds for these various projects. So on that, I just wanted to provide some basic framework and show you the spreadsheet, what it looks like, and hopefully this helps with discussions this morning.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate you continuing to work on this. On the call, there was a comment was made, hold tight on broadband because there's some funding coming from the federal government. So I'm looking at this 5%. We went from 9% to a suggested 7%, and now we're at 5%. And I'm wondering whether or not that's even realistic in light of the fact that there apparently are some rather significant funds coming from the federal government. So just thoughts on that. Does anybody have any other input? And I know that we do have a considerable portion of one of our projects covered, hopefully by Senator Boquist's ask. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ken, for continuing to move us along. Chair, I think that it would be wise, given that we don't know, I think it would be wise for now to keep the 5% as a placeholder, because when we see what the federal programs look like, and when we see what the funding looks like that Senator Boquist has requested, then I feel like we may need some of this as a match or to fill in some of those gaps. If we're going to say, 98%, but there's 2 areas out on Gopher Valley Road or whatever that need an additional tower, and that we can also put a sheriff's repeater on, I think it would be good to keep that money in the budget as it is.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Commissioner Berschauer, any thoughts on the broadband allocation?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Kula. I think we keep it there as a placeholder just in case, and we can always find something to move it into, an economic impact or water and sewer, I'm sure. So let's keep it in there for now.
And thank you. And also, Ken, to your suggestion about actually taking what we've already received as an outline or sort of the baseline, and then doing specific, having grant proposals and having those submitted to us. And then we can go ahead and, much like we do during the budget process, really decide whether or not we want to allocate the whole amount, because we have been given specifics on some of these programs. I know I do have a couple of requests out to other nonprofits. I'm waiting to hear what their needs are at this time. So maybe what we do is do the same thing as we did last time, as far as this is submit your, this is a grant program. Commissioner Kula.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it would be good to, I think that's a good framework, Chair. I think it would be good to have more, maybe in a request for proposals, have more specifics about what we would like to see, just to make sure that there's not things that people put time and effort into that aren't part of what we're interested in with this list of needs and eligible expenses. I think that could be helpful. And then perhaps, Chair, are you proposing that we set percentages now and then place proposals that come into those? Or are you thinking, let's just set aside, let's see what comes in and then categorize them? I know that I keep hearing from people that childcare is a pretty high priority. So I would say, let's put everything we can that we know about into childcare, and then open it up for more proposals, and then see what we have. But there are other ways to do it. So do you have a preference?
Well, the thing is I appreciate what Ken Huffer has done as far as these broad categories and broad percentages. We, as Commissioner Bershauer said, if we find that there's more of a need in economic impacts and not so much in broadband, we just move around percentages. But starting out with the baseline of these basic percentages, they're not written in stone. And then once we do get these proposals and these grant applications, and then I'm wondering along those lines, if the grant application that we've used in the past would pretty much work for our nonprofit grants and basically for the whole economic impact, or for all of them. I mean, Ken, do you have any thoughts on that? Or maybe that's an Abishaw question.
I think it would. We have a program that last year we purchased to help facilitate these grant programs, because with the 3 different grant programs that we rolled out last year, we have a means for getting the applications and collecting the information and customizing it to the various programs. Because each of these categories, if we're doing a grant, it's going to have different, if we're doing a grant for childcare, it's going to have a different requirements, methodology, but we can customize a program to do that. I think each of these categories, if we're looking at doing grant programs for each of these and doing solicitations, what I'd probably have to do is take a step back, schedule some time with Carrie Martin and with Abishaw, and in fact, there might be a couple others that we may need to have at the table on what a grant program is going to look like, because it also trying to determine process that the board would like to see. Do we need to have grant review committees for each of these? So then that way, it helps kind of narrow if you have a recommendation that's coming before the board, or if the board would like to essentially review all the applications and be part of that review process as well. It all depends on, on what the board would like to do moving forward. And maybe there are specific categories. I'm thinking like small business grants as an example. If we did something similar to like we did last year, where the board set the criteria or the eligibility, or where you were really looking at what's the size of the grant and the the types of businesses or what you're looking, the criteria for requesting or utilizing the funds, that could be depending on the amount that's set, that could be several hundred potentially grant applications to review. So something like that, I could see it following a model similar to what's been done in the past, where we have either a review committee, or it's a lottery draw, or it's whatever that process may look like for awarding those types of grants, depending on how many applications or we're anticipating receiving for this type of funding. I think some of them, could be pretty small as far as maybe the number, if you're, as the number of proposals or applications that we might see under workforce development, or even possibly childcare, depending on the types of programs or proposals or information that we want to solicit that may fall into some of those categories. So, I don't mean to take us down into the weeds, but, at some point, I think it's helpful if the board were to look at kind of doing a secondary exercise, that funnel, and kind of prioritizing, and again, I want to make sure that I just put this together really quickly, that if there's criteria or categories, I'm sorry, not criteria, if there's categories that are missing that you would like to see that's under the economic impacts category, we can add those, and it would just help to kind of prioritize and set some guardrails, so then I can get with staff and we can figure out, okay, what are the program elements, what are the solicitations need to look like under each of these categories, so then we can make the board can make decisions moving forward on how those funds are going to be distributed.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioners, would you find it acceptable if we all pretty much took one of these categories and started to think or started to make inquiries in the community about what those would cover? So Commissioner Kula, you've been working on water and infrastructure and those types of needs. Commissioner Bershauer, more on the economic development or economic impacts. And I've been reaching out to the nonprofits and the social services. If we come back with I'm not going to say percentages, but if we come back with the specifics of what we have come up with, and then much like the budget process where we discuss them, I think the last time we did the grant applications, there was some frustration there about people who had applied who perhaps we were acing out the little guys, and the grant savvy people were at the front of the line and had already received PPP money, and then we're coming to the county and we were awarding that because they fit the criteria. So I'm wondering if we do that and then come back as a board, look at what each commissioner is suggesting for that area, and then have that discussion. Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for that proposal. I would feel more comfortable with a more public ask to the community in general, just because if we're talking about small organizations or small businesses versus larger ones who are already in the know, that means that they are going to automatically be the ones, or most likely to be the ones. I'd like to see something more along the lines of a public communication that's, we've dedicated $6 million to water and sewer infrastructure projects. We've dedicated $1 million to economic impacts, which include these things. But the Board of Commissioners is requesting proposals from you for that. I think it's a more publicly transparent and accessible process if we open it to the community.
Oh, I think, yeah, there might be some misunderstanding. I'm suggesting we go through our normal grant application process like we did last time. And if you look at how wide ranging the outreach was, Abisha had a pretty comprehensive list of where they were looking for people to make applications. So it was pretty comprehensive. They were trying to get everybody involved. But what I'm saying is if we bring that back, and so let's say there's all these economic impact applications, and perhaps Commissioner Bershauer makes a suggestion to the board. We've all seen them, but we're not going through the extra step of that EDAC, I guess you could say. Commissioner Kula.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Personally, I would like to see more people involved in assessments of such applications. While I certainly could pick a proposal and say this looks great, there are people in our community who know a lot more than me about water and sewer infrastructure, for example, know more than me, and perhaps more than Commissioner Bershauer about childcare. So I think it's beneficial to have more eyes on it, experts making recommendations, which, as we've talked about, we can choose to take or not to take. And then I guess this is part of it, is that this is a large amount of money that's going to we've discussed the goal is to have a countywide opportunity to transform different parts of our society, right? And to have more people involved in that process, I think would be better, even if, again, it's a funnel that ultimately we make those decisions about.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't purport to be an expert on any of the nonprofits. I know I've been in touch with them, so I just thought that perhaps if you'd been in touch with the various cities and you had an eye toward what we had to spend and what those look like, I don't think this precludes anybody giving us input or advice or counsel on this, and I would certainly welcome it. And we can look at how we do that. And I wouldn't necessarily think we'd have a replay of the EDAC, the composition of that group for this iteration. So necessarily when we're talking about nonprofits and things like that, you'd want people who had more of a stake in those types of issues. So yeah, I would love to have that input as we have our discussion. That I think should be part of it. Yeah, Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of to piggyback on what Commissioner Kula was saying, I think it would be probably beneficial to have a different composition of folks with perhaps each one of these, just because I think that, for the city water and sewer structural projects, I want to hear really from the mayors and the city managers. That to me is the most comprehensive view of here's where the needs are, here's where our priorities are. But when it comes to childcare products or projects, do they really have a finger on that? Not really, probably. So, potentially, even though it might be more work on our end to bring those groups together, having some diversity in terms of each segment. But I want to go back to something we touched on last week, which is, we can do straight up business grants in terms of handing out money, but I really want to focus on, if we do something like that, my preference would be to focus on the impacted industries only, and then invest the rest of it in something that businesses don't necessarily know how to do. And Abisha and I were talking about this the other day, where, we need workforce right now. There's a huge skills gap and they need workforce. They also need childcare. But if you hand them a $10,000 check, they're not necessarily going to know what to do with it or how to accomplish that. So I think that if we are going to do straight up cash grants, it really needs to be focused and targeted on impacted industries and maybe the people who missed out last time. But the rest of it, I really want to focus the bulk of it on those structural things that are really going to help businesses in the long run, even though they may not have the bandwidth to go do it themselves. And so maybe with childcare or workforce development, we bring our community colleges into that group of folks who are looking over and evaluating grants. So that's just kind of where I'm going with this. I don't know about percentages. I don't know that I'm ready to, suggest percentages down in this particular category, but my instinct tells me that we should probably focus a small percentage on just cash grants to impacted industries and put the bulk of it in the rest.
I agree with that, Commissioner. And also, I know that we've had a discussion about the increase, a proposed increase to restaurant licensing fees. And I am opposed to that. I understand the argument from the county's level is we haven't had an increase, and we've sort of been behind the curve on that particular licensing fee increase over the years. And so I understand that they need to make their budget whole on that, but I don't think it's even defensible to even suggest that we do that at this point in time to the most, if you could argue the most impacted industry. So I would like to take a chunk of money and dedicate it to, if they have to make environmental health whole, that we do it on the backs of this ARPA money and not on the backs of a license increase. So things like that. So that would be, to your point, Commissioner Berschauer, that we're not going to hand them a check. We're going to make sure we cover something they would have to otherwise pay. Commissioner Kula?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think that I'm guessing that could come under the what is it, the
revenue
impacts. Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong spot on the screen. And I think that's a great idea. I think that's a good use. And I agree, but maybe would go a little bit further than Commissioner Berschauer on the direct cash payments. That unless we had a whole lot of money, I feel like it's just dropping a little bit for businesses. Whereas Commissioner Berschauer kind of alluded to this, but I would again push it a little bit more, which is that I think that if working with Abisha and perhaps with EDAC, and with, you mentioned community colleges, Commissioner Berschauer. I wonder whether pushing some of those things that would really help all businesses in the county. I say all, even though we were just talking about not trying to help businesses that weren't impacted. But I think going forward, if we have, for example, if we know that childcare is a barrier to all businesses, going 50% busier or whatever, that's going to be a really big economic impact. Getting people back to work and getting the businesses running at full capacity is that's a tremendous investment then as well. I don't know, the hospitality can join Shemeketa, but if we're doing workforce, if we're funding workforce training, again, that's investing so that you get a return in somebody's improved income, I'm assuming is what that's all about. So I would prefer to see money shifted to things that if we're talking about impacted industry grants or just business support, that it go towards programs that have the potential to help all businesses in the county, or a significant portion in sectors.
I agree with that. I also think that under the category of childcare projects, there are a number of different ways we can fund. And just thinking about particularly the private childcare providers, if we could pay for a number of slots per month from them. We've got a lot of folks who are going to alcohol and drug classes and treatment, and a lot of that's at night, and childcare is an obstacle, and they can't complete their programs, and they can't get their kids back, or they can't get through any programs. The other thing is, if you've got children of parents who have to go to court, what do they do with their children? So I'd like to find a way for us to fund the court care program, and that would be to just take some of this money, buy a couple of slots like we do like they do with Benton County, or renting beds, and just say, listen, we're going to buy those slots and use them for people who need them. Maybe we don't have folks coming to alcohol and drug treatment. Maybe we don't have folks that month coming to court, but we've got those, and it's by expanding those private providers that I think will be more cost effective than necessarily building this giant behemoth like Oasis project. But I'd like to look at all the options for childcare.
And Chair, if I may, that resonates with me. I think that doing those, I would love to see, for example, a proposal, to come to us about that, where you say, this is what it would cost to essentially have a placeholder. It allows a licensed child care provider the flexibility, right, to then perhaps expand to other people, or look forward to hiring another person. It has ripple effects, not only just with somebody who is going to court for an appearance, but also for the provider, and then for the community.
Absolutely. Okay, Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to throw this out because if I'm hearing Commissioner Kula right, you're kind of moving away from cash grants in terms of just handing over a check. Are we in a position where we just say we're not going to do that? Because it doesn't feel, I mean, we've talked about generational impact with this money. That really doesn't feel like it has a generational impact. It's an immediate impact. But are we to the point where our businesses are now, reopening, and there's still plenty of assistance for them if they needed help immediately? I'm just not really sure how I feel about that, because we do have restaurants reopening, but the workforce situation is so bad that some of them are having to close down and only work and be open 50% of the time because they just don't have the labor force to handle it. So how are we feeling on that? Do we want to just completely turn away from cash grants and focus on infrastructure type of needs, or what do you guys think?
Commissioner Kula?
Yeah, thank you. I was like, well, who has spoken most recently? I did, but I did have a thought on that, which is that if we, I would recommend that we go away from a cash grant, but if the two of you felt like it was important to really target it, I would want to hear from the folks who received the immediate relief grants last spring, and also the folks who received the $10,000 grants that we had to do a lottery for in the late fall. And mostly I want to see, was this a significant amount of money? Did it go towards keeping them open? Was that our goal? Was it just a blanket, help you? And if we are to then dedicate money to it, I would want to have come to agreement among us about what specifically is our goal with it.
I wanted to also talk about the workforce. The workforce issue is something that's nationwide, and a lot of it is attributed to the fact that people were getting paid more to stay home than to go to work, or it really just didn't pencil out to go to work when you were getting this increase in unemployment and a variety of these other benefits. So I think to the degree that we are able to, because we've got policies in place we have no control over that are paying people to stay home, until such time as people, I mean, there are states that are saying we're not going to continue this extra, what is it, $300 a month or whatever that is. So until such time as that plays out, we don't have a workforce that's motivated to get back to work. Some of them aren't. So we've got folks who are just not coming back to work. So I don't know what we can do other than to try to help these businesses that are impacted just get through this time. And maybe that is a combination of cash grants and combination of these other infrastructure like child projects and impacted industries grants, things like that. So I don't know. I think it's a little bit of everything.
And Commissioner Berschauer, I'm sure you have more thoughts on it. You shared them. I wondered whether you might be able to talk with Abisha, because obviously she has more of a finger on the pulse of these things than I do, about whether there are projects or proposals that would provide, rather than essentially giving a subsidy of some kind to a business, that would instead open up an opportunity. I know that I think it was EDAC, one of the things that they talked about and presented a proposal to us was to have the Board of Commissioners consider, I think it's called the Safe Harbor. Do you all recall this? This is essentially a land use associated ordinance that I believe Polk County has, that allows for small businesses that are associated with farms more opportunity to innovate. And I wonder whether proposals like that to get funded are a way to provide the opportunity rather than to give the the cash.
Commissioner Berschauer?
Chair, yeah, we can look into that. Abisha and I talked about the success of the grant program at the end of last year. And mind you, I wasn't here, so you guys probably have a better idea of the ins and outs of that. But we also discussed that further follow-up with some of those grant recipients is wise to figure out, was it impactful? Was it useful? I mean, anecdotally, we've heard that people use that to help pay their rent. They used it to buy outdoor tents so they could, grow their capacity. So obviously it did work as it was intended. But, we have talked about doing a follow-up and figuring out where the holes were, and maybe we missed, a certain segment of industries that should have been more heavily targeted. So I think that I agree with Commissioner Kula. We should probably run through that first and sort of get an idea of how successful that was before we do it again. So maybe that's just something that we have as a placeholder, but we do a little bit more research before we dive into that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think historically, even before we had these types of programs, when we did business grants, when we allocated those funds, the commissioners were the ones who were choosing, and we would get the applications and we would go through, and then we would vet them, and then we'd come together as a group. So it was a really arduous process, but I think there was a lot of good, because you became really, really intimately involved with what the ask was. But one of the things we never did really is go back and do a retrospective of whether or not those grants were effective. And I know, having heard from about 2 separate businesses that completely closed down after we had funded them specifically for business expansion, was really, it felt kind of, hey, wait a second, you were supposed to do this with the money, and you had this great plan and it looked really like it was working. And then to come to find out that you're done, you've just decided to end it and go take a job as an individual in the private sector. So I wish we could go back at some point and look at those success stories and find out what happened. But yeah, now would be a good time for us to really look at the ones we just did. So do we want to go ahead and
if I may, Chair?
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to, talk a little bit about process, and from what I'm hearing from the board, there seems to be consensus that you would like us to do some follow-up with the previous grant awards that were done. And I think, and I just want to kind of clarify kind of roles and things like that, because that was really a county facilitated program that we had rolled out, and Abisha provided support on behalf and providing that input and perspective on behalf of SEDCOR, but that was really a grant program. And so it would probably be more appropriate, because we have the contact information for the grant recipients, that I could work with Carrie Martin. We could put together a quick survey. We could put a survey out and get input and solicit data back from grant awardees. I mean, it could be a really, we'll try to not make it a labor intensive survey to fill out, but at least put out a solicitation or put out information to collect some data and some reports back, from grant recipients from last fall. And so hearing that there's consensus, I'll work with Carrie and we'll come up with a plan to do that survey, because again, we have that in our grant database. We have all the contact information for where the awards were sent, and so we'll get that information collected. That should be relatively simple to do, and hopefully we get a lot of really good responses. The other part that I would add into, because a lot of the things that we had learned as these grant programs have evolved over the years, even going into the economic development grants that we've done in the past, I think the one important element that we have formalized those programs a lot more than what we've done in the past. there's a solicitation, there's applications, and then there's a grant agreement with reporting requirements that are also built into that. You know, having signed the hundreds of grant agreements that we had in place, you know, because I had to sign every single one of them that went into place for the ones that we did last fall. You know, we do have some reporting requirements. We've built in some, you know, some conditions into the programs. It's not release the funds. So there is some accountability and some documentation that we do have in place to capture that. So I just wanted to put that out. We'll get something put together. We'll collect the data that the board would like to see as far as how they've used the funds. The other part that I just really wanted to kind of circle back, and I understand that the board's not necessarily ready to prioritize on how these funds are going to be applied under the economic development. I think one of the tricky parts that we run into, it's like any other solicitation, that if it's a general solicitation, or if you're requesting information that doesn't necessarily have guardrails on how much is available, what the criteria is, you know, folks are going to ask for, you know, potentially funding for the entire project, and then we end up in a position that we end up with more requests than what we have funding for. Versus if if we're able to narrow this list a little bit and narrow the funds that we have available for the project, it helps programs really sharpen their pencils, look at what their immediate needs are, and determine, you know, this would help us and as match for going after funds over here. You know, it's a way to kind of have those discussions. So I again wanted to just kind of put in a plug that, you know, I think it would be helpful to again kind of set guardrails, because I think some of the challenges that we have is, you know, this week we could get this really high priority, you know, fully vetted, well thought out proposal, and we put all the funds, and then next week you get another request and it's like, well, I wish we would have held back some funds, you know, for this other project. And so that's just something I wanted to put in there and just, you know, advocate for. That's where I was kind of hoping that if we're applying this funnel and if we can kind of narrow these funds, then we can build programs based on the criteria that you're talking about, on where we really want to prioritize and target these funds in these, you know, different categories. And if there's categories, you know, that I put on the list that we can remove that and just not have any funds available and really focus on those other areas and start building what the mechanics are going to look like on how we get those funds out. So.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. I would, you know, looking at this list, some of the things that are on the nonprofit grants are smaller, and some of them are bigger, and some of them are, I think, really time sensitive, and some of them are by the end of the summer, and some of them are kind of, this is part of a strategic plan and this is the next step, but without necessarily a time frame. I would find it helpful, so it's the first comment, I would find it helpful to find out the urgency of some of this work too. Just looking at it, you know, there's probably some of that it needs to happen before the school year starts, but some of it needs to happen, you know, July 1st. I would find it helpful to hear kind of the urgency level of each of them. But looking at childcare, small business grants, impacted industries grants, nonprofit grants, and workforce development. I think that the workforce development one, it sounds like is also kind of in the childcare realm. And I just wonder whether you would consider a proposal that's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, of 1/3 to childcare, 1/3 to impacted industries. And that would be impacted industries in my mind is, you know, any of those businesses that are ways that we can help all of them rather than targeting those cash grants. And then 1/3 to the nonprofit grants, and treat the nonprofit grants kind of the same way we've done other grant programs to nonprofits, where there's a process. Some of these are really, in the scale, are very affordable. And I'd say, like, We may even want to say like, under 50,000 is an expedited process, and then over 200,000 is a more extensive process. So those are some of my thoughts kind of to try to get us to the next stage.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the urgency point is well taken. I know Remnant Initiatives is really looking at a shortfall and really looking at trying to get something in place before the next fiscal year. And so there's that urgency there. When you look at, for instance, some of the asks from Lutheran has some asks that are on a grander scale for projects that have really been on a wish list that are millions and millions of dollars. But I think when you look at, for instance, some of the, whether it's food bank or whether it's helping newly released adults in custody, those types of things, rescue mission, those are the critical ones in terms of social services. And yet then you've got childcare projects. We can do the smaller ones cheaper and faster without looking at a big project oasis. What can we do locally and get more slots? So yeah, I think that priority time-wise is important. Commissioner Bershauer, go ahead, Commissioner Kula.
Oh, I just forgot. I think that I was talking to Councilor Gary from the city of McMinnville, and I think that he or the city may be presenting us with a proposal to fund slots in Kids on the Block too, which again, in its existing program, just funds an expansion of it, a lower cost because the spaces are already existing. So I'm just thinking similar to you was like, what's the lowest cost thing we can do to increase the availability of childcare?
Right. And then we had asked the cities, I know I'd reached out to the cities to say, hey, what would some of your shortfalls be after you've used up your ARPA funds? What would you conceivably be coming to the county for? Can we get an idea of what that is, so we're not doubling up on some of these projects? So they were still working on those and going to their city councils with those discussions. So we still have so much more information to gather, but I think we're at least getting there week after week. Commissioner Bershauer, thoughts?
Chair, I agree with what was said. I'm not sure about a third. It sounds about right, but without seeing specifics on childcare projects or even some more depth on the workforce development programs, I'm not sure. It sounds reasonable, but maybe that's where we start. And if we have to adjust it, we adjust it a little bit.
Yes, the third is probably still up for discussion, because I don't think they're all going to fall into that nice little neat category, but maybe we start there and see, because I know we're going to get a lot of, or we've already gotten a lot of requests in each of these categories, and we haven't even really put out a solicitation for the business part of this. So, yeah. All right, so as far as now, Abisha is scheduled for the 24th to come and do a presentation. Is that right, Ken?
That is correct. That's her. She'll be doing the SEDCOR. It's part of the contract, the quarterly update. At that same time, I also believe Kathy Tate is going to be to also provide an update on the status of the Online Northwest broadband project that the board provided funds for out of CRF funds last year.
Okay, great. So I think we'll get more information when Abisha is here, maybe some suggestions. And Commissioner Bershauer, when in your conversations with Abisha, maybe get some input from her on looking at the funds we have to spend, the way we've whittled it down and put percentages in to which now I see are updated in real time. Thank you, Mr. Huffer. So you've got 33, 33, and 33. So see what Abisha has to say about this from the economic impact perspective, knowing we've got a really broad category. But the other thing I wanted to get an update on is we were looking at putting together an RFP for broadband so that we can get a number of providers looped into our discussion. Ken?
we're still working on that. I know I haven't had a chance to connect with Christian also being out, because I know this was really his, kind of idea about doing the RFI, the request for information. I had conversations with Carrie Martin, and so Carrie Martin and I are hoping to connect with Christian on Monday, and we'll finalize and get something out to follow up on that.
Okay, great. And even if well, okay, and then we can talk to Abishaw further and really get maybe some input on the broadband and the whole RFI, RFP process, because we have people that are knocking on the door saying, hey, I know you're interested in broadband. Hey, I know you've got very deep pockets these days, and how do we get in on the action? So we're happy to comply. So is there anything else? Go ahead, Commissioner Kula.
Sorry, my space bar didn't unmute. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you, Chair, if you knew anything about the timing I know that the funding hasn't been approved yet, that Senator Boquist put forward as the request, but if it was to be approved, which I suspect it will be, what would be the timing of the dispersal to the county? Do you have any sense?
Well, I asked him that. Thank you, Commissioner. I asked him that last week, and I forwarded the remarks and the response to our administrator. And basically he said, you never know with this bunch. So I don't have an answer for you, except that I really feel like nothing's a sure thing in Salem, but I think that based on each senators and each representative's allocations, Senator Boquist did make Polk County and Yamhill County a priority, and he gave us more money because we're his favorite and he likes us best. No, that's not true. We just have a bigger population than Polk County has. What can I say?
Yeah, okay,
Anyway.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure, we weren't, if there was a time crunch for getting this, it doesn't sound like it is, but I would say that if we can keep moving on it, that would be my preference.
Well, I keep bugging him and he keeps bugging them. So now it's really in their hands. And as soon as I hear something, you'll be the first to know. Or maybe after Ken. Okay, anything else, commissioners? Will we move on to the next item? And thanks, Ken, for keeping us moving along on this one. Okay, thank you. So we will move on to department updates. We have none. We're on to our consent agenda. Motion to approve, please.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Sorry, Commissioner Bershauer.
We have a motion to approve. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. On to item I, other business, and these are add-ons and non-consent. Consideration of authorizing the notice of intent to award the Yamhill County 2021 overlay project to Knife River Corporation in the amount of $1,719,419.25. Commissioner Coolidge, do you have anything to add to this? We saw the information in the packet.
Exactly. No, Chair, I don't. It's good to see this going forward again. And I want to thank Christian for his work on it as well.
Okay, do you want to make a motion?
I move that we approve item I1.
Okay, motion to approve. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. On to item I2, which is consideration of authorizing Yamhill County Health and Human Services to submit applications for specialty court grant funds administered by the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And as you know, commissioners, or maybe you don't know, Yamhill County is one of the earliest drug courts in the nation. I believe we're number 4. And if you've watched Judge Collins and Judge Easterday working with the folks who are working on recovery, it's nothing short of amazing. So those grant funds were in jeopardy at one point, where we did lose the money for the county, the specialty court administrator, but now we've got them back. So I'm glad to see that. So is there a motion to, I'll make a motion to approve item I2. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Motion passes. Item I3, consideration of authorizing the approval of intent to apply for the 2021-22 Oregon Emergency Management Performance Grant, the EMPG, in the amount of $1,197,047.50. This comes along every year. And we are just going ahead and approving the authorization to apply. So I will make a motion to approve. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. On to item I4, consideration of approval of an intent to award a contract to Graviton for the Yamhill County Enterprise Resource Planning, the ERP software system project, in the amount of $5,582,265. And we have with us our Mike Barnhart, our finance director, and Justin Hogue, our business services director, and also joining us from Barry Dunn, the consultants, is Seth Hedstrom, and Carrie Hinton, our executive producer, is going to line these folks up so they can join us. Mr. Hedstrom, thank you for joining us. We see you there. Thank you. Welcome. There's Mike.
Yes, there I am.
Hi there, Mike. How are you?
Pretty good.
And Justin is just
Actually, Justin was not available to join us. He had a conflicting meeting. And so I think he's going to join us as soon as he is able to wrap up that meeting. But I was also going to just kind of kick this off before kind of handing it off to Mike and Seth to provide an overview. Again, this agenda item, where we're at in the process, we've been engaged in an RFP process. This is a step in the RFP process, which is the notice of intent to award. And I'll let Mike and Seth go into the details and how we got here on the next steps. But again, this is the ERP project. This is our central finance system. But it's more than just our central finance system. It's also our budget module. It's our HR module. It's there's contract management. There's various. This is the brains of the county that we're looking to update. As you know, we've been operating with GEMS, and that's a software platform that we've had in place since, I believe, 1996. It's been updated along the ways, but it's actually a platform that it's really reached the end, and we really need to be looking at replacing the system. And I know we've had a lot of discussions during previous budget meetings where we've talked about this project. And while, excitement is probably the wrong term for it about going through a major software conversion project like this, this is really part of a multi-year project that it's going to take before we get everything fully implemented and we're up and running. And so we're very early in the process. I'm happy and pleased that we were able to, get this far in the RFP. We had excellent responses, and we're now ready to do the notice of intent to award to start the next step in the process. And at this point, I will turn it over to Mike, who has really been the project manager and our lead on behalf of the county in making this happen. So Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Ken. And good morning, commissioners and Chair Starrett. And I'll just introduce Seth with Barry Dead now, so I can see you there, Seth. So we're going to kind of break this up into two little sections. It won't be very long. And I don't think I know how to bring up anything here on my screen. I think I'm kind of new to the Zoom bit here. So we had a little PowerPoint presentation. We can probably just skip that unless I can find a way to get it up. Anybody know how to do that?
Allow me, Mike.
Oh, great job. Thank you, Seth. There we go.
That's
This is why we have Seth.
back.
Appreciate that. So, okay. So briefly here, this is just only 6 slides on here. Let's go to slide 2 real quick. And this is, me and Seth will both do a little introduction then. I'll give a little project background. He'll talk about the needs assessment and the system selection process. That's extremely important. That's how we got to where we're at today. And then I'll discuss the preferred vendor and why we have chosen them. And then we can have some questions. So again, Mike Barnhart, I think all of you know me, but I've been in government for over 20 years. Before that, worked in CPA firms for a long time. So I've been in finance since I got out of college. So, and Seth?
Morning, everyone. Seth Hedstrom here. I'm a principal with our firm's government consulting group, and I had overall responsibility for the work we performed so far. I've been with the firm now for 13 years, and I've been a part of about 50 projects like this in varying stages of planning, selection, and implementation. It's good to be with you all today.
Thanks, Seth. So background, Ken's already mentioned this, but our current ERP system is very old. We advertise it's over 22 years old, but you realize we've been on this for a decade before the iPhone came out. So the technology is extremely old. The most difficult parts about it are it's hard to get help working on it anymore because the technology is so old. You can't find programmers out there. It's difficult to even get our current system owners. When I say owners, I mean the people who sold us a system to be able to get it to function carefully and correctly because the technology is so old. It's a very manual system. It's pretty much all paper, very difficult to export things into Excel, etc. And the reports are just very cumbersome and antiquated. And also, yeah, we need better access to data. I know Ken and I and all the departments struggle with getting information out of the system that we need. And so it's probably been 6-7 years, I believe, that the board has been setting aside money for this project, knowing it was going to happen. And we made the decision last year that it was time. We just needed to get moving on it. So the board approved a contract with Barry Dunn, of which Seth is our main contact there, and they are our ERP consultant. The big processes for us are to help us develop an RFP and then select the vendor, which is where we're at today. And then, of course, once we do that, we'll move on to the implementation stage, which they will be assisting us with as well. So go ahead, Seth.
Great, thanks. And want to take some time just to go a little bit through our approach and work completed so far. We'll keep it pretty high level, but we have a project broken into 5 different phases. Our first phase was primarily around project management, but focusing on the second phase here, a few key points we did want to just bring to this group's attention. First and foremost, really just wanted to emphasize that as we got into the requirements analysis, we focused on being highly collaborative. We kicked off through a web survey, allowing all users of the current system to provide input around strengths, weaknesses, and pain points. We also reviewed a large amount of existing documentation to become familiar with processes in the current state. We then spent some great quality time with folks. Last October, we ended up having about 50 stakeholders participating in our fact-finding meetings where we dived into current state processes, the use of tools, and again, challenges and areas for improvement. Coming out of that, and really the culmination of phase 2 here, was a report in which we outlined the current state, listed out those challenges, and we also recommended some key considerations. Some of those considerations lended decision points that we made. Others were more downstream thoughts to be considered about. But when we exited phase 2, we did have the opportunity to kind of reconvene with the group and make sure there was consensus on the problem we're really trying to solve here. And I think Mike did a good job of summarizing that. We then headed right into the system selection process, which is our third and our fourth phase. Phase 3 focused on developing a comprehensive RFP package, inclusive of the normal procurement language, but also requirements for future software capabilities, integrations to other county systems that we want to leverage, data conversion, technical items, and from there on out. That RFP was issued in January and 8 proposals were received, which from our experience was a great response rate. Seeing 8 and a variety among those 8 was a good number to evaluate. In February, we worked with our evaluation team to down select to a group of 4 that were invited in for vendor demonstrations. And over 2 whole weeks, we spent time having the vendors demonstrate their software, talk about how they implement it, talk about their technical capabilities. And again, a key point where we invited a lot of stakeholders to allow a lot of input and hear a lot of feedback around those demonstrations. Soon after the demonstrations, the evaluation committee met again and boiled it down to 2 vendors. And those 2 vendors became the focus of reference checks and site visits. And I certainly would applaud the team's efforts at that point in all of our projects. It's usually where, we've been at it for a while, but the group kept the nose to the grindstone and made those reference calls and talked with some folks that had recently implemented these systems and longtime users. So a lot of information came from that, and that helped us get to the point of a final decision on a preferred vendor. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you. So the finalist here that we got in front of you, the name is Graviton. So probably no one's ever heard of Graviton before, neither had we. But the industry right now has what are called integrators, where these are professionals at software implementations and the professionals at particular technologies. And so, for example, you probably wouldn't get an Oracle implementing a system for us by themselves, but you would get a Graviton who knows the system, and we hire them to help us implement the system. So they're sort of a go-between. So they buy the software, well, we get the software, and then they help us implement it. But they're the main group here for the next year or two to implement. One of the big things that we had to consider is, do we want to go an on-premise solution or a cloud solution? Every vendor that we had, except for one, recommended a cloud solution. We had a few that said, well, you can buy your hardware, you can buy the software, you can hire your staff to do all this implementation, or you can go with the cloud. And this is really where all the technology is going right now. I mean, we all hear about the horror stories about other local governments, even some in Oregon, that have had ransomware and other kinds of security breaches. Well, the cloud is a far more secure option. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but we really looked at it and we felt comfortable that cloud was the way to go for the security, the safety, the backups, all those kinds of things. The software that Graviton was recommending is Oracle Cloud. Oracle, as you know, has been around a long time. They do have several Oregon governments. Oracle they got Marion County, they have Lane County, they've got Jackson County, and they do City of Springfield, City of Eugene. Now, they're Oracle customers, but they're different packages under Oracle. PeopleSoft, for example, is owned by Oracle. JD Edwards is owned by Oracle. But point being is that there is a presence of Oracle across the state here. They're a leader in paperless technology. Right now, with our current system, we do a tremendous amount of paper. Invoices are signed manually. They're shifted around manually. They're entered. They're scanned in, in different locations. And this Oracle Cloud will be so electronic that the information will basically flow electronically to each other. You can approve your invoices on the computer versus having to manually sign them. So it's going to greatly reduce a lot of the manual processes and transmissions that we have. So the cloud is a great option, and Oracle is one of the best ones out there. Very well known, and of course, very reputable. Experience, this is back to Graviton now. They've been doing this for over a decade. They have 50 professionals working with them. We talked to 2 other governments that have been using Graviton to implement Oracle Cloud. They're both very happy with them. They couldn't think of a higher quality group of professional implementers and integrators to work with on this project. Very happy. We also like Graviton's project approach. They took a very hands-on approach when it comes to training, a very hands-on approach when it comes to knowing how the modules are going to work together. They've actually assigned over a dozen professionals to us on this project. Each one knows their section very, very well. You can get some projects where you're going to get 1 or 2 people to do the whole gambit. Oracle has professionals at each of the modules. And so we're going to get the top knowledge on each section. And then, of course, they work together as a team to bring it together. So we are very happy with that. Implementation strategy. Of course, a big fear of mine is change management. We're going from a very old system to here a very new system. And the technology is extremely different. And I mean, I'm an older guy. It's kind of hard for me to learn new tricks too. But they are change management professionals. They know how to train, how to teach, how to bring people along, how to work on our current processes and policies to encourage us to change where we need to change to be with best practice. So they had a fantastic project approach and implementation strategy. And their schedule, we liked, I think one of the best schedules. They really followed our annual and semi-annual processes as to when they want to go live. You want to try to stay with some key dates so that you're not doing something in the middle of a fiscal year, middle of a calendar year, middle of a quarter. They're flexible on that, but they provided some good structure for us. And because of how they're approaching this, they had a pretty quick schedule. They're hoping we can be done, in a pretty quick manner. And that's what we're focusing on is we don't want to get too much burnout on this project. And when things last too long, you lose energy, you lose focus. You don't implement what you want to implement because you're just burned out. And we think because they're providing such quality staff, so many individuals, we're going to have a better chance of success getting this done and getting it done right. And lastly, the cost competitiveness. And Ken will clarify this, but you saw in the board order, it said that the cost was $5.5 million. Well, that's the 10-year cost. That is not the implementation. That is to implement and to pay annual subscription fees for the next 10 years. So your memo breaks that a little bit better for you to see there. But the cost of Oracle was actually the second lowest of all the vendors. They were not the high cost vendor Oracle was. Graviton itself was higher cost, not the highest, but one of the higher costs for implementation. But that's because they are expecting us to do less work than other vendors might. And as we all know, HR is not staffed. We don't have a lot of excess capacity, if anything, in HR. We don't have much in finance. IT is a pretty tightly structured operation and not a lot of excess. And so we need professionals that can come in and do the work that we can't do because we don't have any excess capacity. And some of the vendors out there were scaring us, saying, well, you'll do 60% of the work. And we're thinking that's not going to happen. We don't have that capacity. The project's going to fail if we don't get the help. And Graviton provided us the best opportunity for success in this project.
And Mike, if I may, I just wanted to echo that and just kind of add to the fact that I just want to emphasize that, one of the challenges that we're having with this is, if you can imagine, sorry for a poor analogy, but we're still having to do our day jobs and we're still going to be, so we're essentially still flying the old plane, the old prop engine plane. We're still going to be in the air having to do this while at the same time trying to transition to that new jet airliner that is, that we're hopefully going to get all the data transferred over. We're going to get our processes improved while at the same time still trying to keep the other plane in the air and navigate that. And again, that was one of the things that we were looking at is with Graviton, with what they were offering as far as the project approach and implementation. I don't think I really want to emphasize that. I think it's going to be really important to ensure that we have sufficient support, because we can't necessarily shut down finance, HR, and various departments that are also that utilize the finance system to implement this new project. And so having the project approach that's been presented and the level of support that we're going to receive for the implementation is really critical in making sure that this project's going to be a success. And, because again, like I was said before, I think it's really important to highlight, this is our central finance system. This is a lot of our processes and everything that we do here in the county flows through this ERP. And so it's really critical to make sure that we implement this project correctly and be able to move into the future and improve our processes. So sorry, Mike, I just wanted to just add and
that's fine. Thanks, Ken. And I'll add one more thought here to all of this. We really, Seth already pointed it out, that we really worked with the departments on this. They spent themselves 2 weeks watching demonstrations. And And so after it was all over, they submitted their responses and their grading to us. And then I talked to all of them individually, the larger departments at least, about what they thought. And it was pretty much, they all believed Graviton was the one. Because they had a great RFP. They had a very good interview and demonstration. And they gave us the confidence when you look at their resumes and their history and their experience, that they're the ones that are going to give us the best chance of success making this happen and making it happen well and making it happen in a reasonable amount of time. So that's all I had to say. And now you can have some questions for us or talk amongst yourselves there.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mr. Hedstrom, for being here. Questions about implementation and when the process starts to go into effect?
Well, that's still a little bit of negotiation because we're not far behind, maybe a couple of weeks behind. If we get approval today, then we will start negotiations with Graviton. And I don't know how long those would take. Seth might have more experience than that with me, but Seth?
Yeah. So if approved today, our next step will be to initiate contract negotiations with Graviton. We've done some pre-planning with Christian, namely, just to be ready for that. But that process can be everywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. And the focus is not to rush it, but to make sure that we're all comfortable with a statement of work, including an implementation timeline as part of that process.
Okay. So I would just say, just in terms of speculation, if everything goes according to plan, which we know sometimes it doesn't.
Well, their recommendation is to do the budget system by January 1st of 2022, which will be the next budget cycle. But that's going to involve getting the employees into the new system because the employee data is going to feed the budget system so that we have really highly accurate budget numbers for the personnel costs, as well having the new chart of accounts built out in the system in order to budget with that. And then having the data of the older budgets, there's things that are in GEMS now, not integrated, but converted into the new system. So they were hoping 1st of January for this. So a lot of it will depend on, I guess, on if we're ready for that and how fast we can do it. But that was their hope.
I think Mr. Huffer is giving that knowing look of that's a big if, and that's if everybody's on board and everybody does their part. And we all know that doesn't always happen. We've been prepared ahead of time. I've been working on the chart of accounts for a month already here. Okay.
But a lot of it's going to be us getting the contract negotiations completed before they can start work.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah. Because as far as process goes, because the next would be the contract negotiations. And then once we have a final contract, we'd be coming back before the board with the final contract. So you'd have another opportunity to see the final details of what the contract's going to look like, the timeline, and maybe a lot of those specific timing and work plan questions are really going to come out as part of that contract when we come back here in the next 3 to 4 weeks, giving time for the negotiations to take place. And, and county counsel's office and Mike and my office, we're all going to be engaged in those negotiations. And so once that gets finalized, once we get through the RFP process, as far as checking all the boxes that we have to do now, because the other point, correct me, Seth, but I believe the notice of intent to award, there's the protest period that would be opened up for anybody who's, the other applicants to challenge that. But at the same time, we can go ahead and start going into those contract negotiations, even while that protest period is still ongoing. But we're really, it's one that we want to be deliberate in our approach, but at the same time, we do have some timeline things related to the old system that's kind of hanging over our head. So there's some real urgency in moving forward with implementing the new system in a timely fashion. As an example, our primary web interface that we use to interact with GEMS is Internet Explorer, you know, and that's going out of support, you know, next year. So there's some things that are IT driven, but then there's also some, you know, real process driven. You know, we don't necessarily want to implement a new budget module in the middle of the budget process. So it does kind of make sense, because knowing timing wise that we kick off the building of the following year's budget in December and January, it kind of matches up with timeline to then implement the system and kind of work through a budget process at the same time while we're implementing.
Thank you, Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to Ken Huffer's opening comments, which is that actually your department heads, I remember, did celebrate when you announced that you were starting work on the RFP process. I think it was the 2020 budget process. So I just want to correct you that people were really excited about this. And I also want to thank, you know, everybody here that's been involved. It's a lot of work to get us a behind the scenes, really efficient, really effective system. And I recognize more than ever how important that is. We see challenges at the state, and I think, gosh, I'm really glad that we have Mike Barnhart and, you know, Justin Hogue working on this for us.
Yeah, a report just came out at the state. They did an audit and showed there had been billions of dollars of overpayment. Oops.
6.4 billion of unintended
overspending. Well, that's just chump change, huh? All right. Well, I want to say if there are any other questions, we'll go ahead and we can move on this. Mr. Hedstrom, thank you for being with us. Mike, thank you. And we appreciate all the work that everybody's done to get us to this place. So I'm sure we'll see you again when we come back around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So do we have a motion? Oh, go ahead.
I would move that we approve item I4.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate that. Maybe what we can do is take a 5-minute break and then come back. We've got a public hearing, item J. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We are returning to the formal informal Board of Commissioners meeting for June 10th, 2021 at the point of item J, which is the public hearing. And on our list today is item J1, which is consideration of the docket FT-13-20, which is a request for an appeal of the planning director's approval of a forest template dwelling. The applicant is Catherine Wright, representing Loyola Heights LLC, and the appellant is Thousand Friends of Oregon, tax lot 5435-600, and this is continued from May 13th at the point of staff recommendation. Welcome, Mr. Friday and Ms. Armstrong. And Ken, are you going to do the staff recommendation?
Stephanie will do the recommendation, and then I had a few things to add.
Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
All right. The application satisfies the template test, and based on the testimony and evidence in the record, the applicant has demonstrated that forest use predominated on the parcel in 1993. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the application with the conditions listed in the staff report.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ken?
Yes, I just wanted to add and have this in the record that Yamhill County Planning has had this long tradition of encouraging neighbors to work out their differences. It's really hard to do that in a hearing setting. So if there's a conflict, we try to see if the parties are willing to resolve their issues outside of the hearing process. And a few of the reasons for that include, getting neighbors to work together to address their conflicts is really a powerful thing. And it leads to resolving local problems and issues. I think it builds trust and creates a better neighborhood and overall a better community. In addition, our office really can't solve every problem by conditions and enforcement. We just don't have the employee time to do that. So we want the neighbors to solve problems amongst themselves. So it was with that thought in mind that we encouraged the applicant and the appellant, Mr. Brutke, the original appellant, I should say, to work together. And to their credit, they spent several months working on the issue and came to an agreement. And then Mr. Brutke withdrew his appeal. Now, it had been my understanding that Friends of Yamhill County had a policy of not opposing an application when no neighbor was in opposition. And as such, I was very surprised when they picked up this appeal after the issue with the neighbor had been resolved. And I'm really disappointed and concerned with Friends of Yamhill County over this change in policy, as it may no doubt put other amicable resolutions at risk. And in short, why would an applicant spend the time negotiating with their neighbor if they're going to have to go to hearing anyway? So I'm just wanting to put out there that I'm hopeful Friends of Yamhill County will relook at this policy and change it going forward.
Thank you, Ken. That's good to know. I know when we've had a few of those in the last few years of neighbors being able to work things out, and it's kind of nice to see that. So, well, at this point, we can go ahead, I understand, Todd, and close the hearing and come back at the point of deliberation.
That's correct.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
So we'll go ahead and close the hearing and we'll come back. Commissioners, thoughts? Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. There was a freezing up of Commissioner Berschauer for me. I feel like between the information from Mr. Scherer, the information presented by Catherine Jernstead, and the presentation from Catherine Wright on behalf of the applicant, I still have realized that 1992 to 93 is an arbitrary date, but it sure seems like there is doubt in my mind about whether it was in fact not being farmed and predominantly forested. And I can't get that out of my mind. I feel like there's enough information in the record to suggest that it was being farmed. And I do note that in the, I can pull it up, but in the rebuttal from Councillor Wright to Friends of Yamhill County and Thousand Friends. She says that, that mowing an orchard is not on its own farm use, but it sure shows me that somebody was taking care of trees that were on the property. People aren't going to mow their orchard if they're not farming. And so I just want to note that I don't feel like we've had enough compelling evidence to support the test.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go ahead at this point and make a motion to deny the appeal of the planning director's approval of the forest template dwelling. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay. So just to be clear, this is a request to deny the appeal of the planning director's approval. Okay. All right. So the motion has passed.
And you understand that's the approval of the application, correct? Great, thank you.
Okay.
We get, can we have a 2 weeks to get the findings to you, June 24th?
Yes.
That's what I would propose.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friday. Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Thank you, everybody. We'll go ahead and move on. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it wasn't totally clear, and I think what I'm confused about is Commissioner Kula's comments and then voting in the affirmative. Were you thinking that you were denying the application?
Thank you, Commissioner Berschauer. I know. Yes, no, I appreciate that. I was like, I'm literally on the fence about it, and so this was the like I need to make a decision. I was hoping that there'd be more discussion from the two of you.
Well, I mean, and to go back to that, the only thing I would say is that I don't know that I necessarily agree with the comment about if you're not farming something, you wouldn't necessarily mow something, because I've mown things that were considered farming and I wasn't farming them. I just didn't want there to be a wildfire or unsightly grass in between rows of trees. But I think that it really did, if you look at it was a very laborious process to go through and look at all of this. Was it farmed? Was it forested? It was, and the pictures, the pictures were telling too on both sides of the issue. But if there is some confusion about what we're doing, we are approving the application and denying the appeal of the application. So I just want to make sure maybe the way I posed it was not clear, but really basically it's just to deny the appeal and to approve. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Chair, I was thinking in my mind. Yeah, I was thinking in my mind denying the application. So perhaps my vote was not correct.
Okay, it's a little bit wonky. So Todd, do you want to?
Commissioner Berschauer, sorry, Chair.
No, go ahead.
Commissioner Berschauer, what was your intent? Is your not the vote, but was your intent to uphold the application and approve a forest template dwelling, or was it to deny the forest template dwelling?
My vote would be to approve the application. I feel like the evidence submitted was sufficient to determine that it was a forest, a forest template dwelling. So I think I voted wrong technically, but my intention was to vote to approve
the application
or uphold the application. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to, yes, and to Commissioner Sterrett and also to Commissioner Berschauer's question, while to me, it sure seemed like the evidence suggested that it was being farmed commercially. The evidence also in the record to me suggested that it was predominantly in forest use. So that's where I got that this challenging balance, right? And then I wasn't around for it, but the evidence in the record about we changed the zoning, but we weren't intending to put a house on it, to then the presentation of now we want to put a house on it. It's hard. And I see on here one in the audience, a neighbor who has an extensive, very productive, very successful vineyard. And I'm assuming that they're concerned about having neighbors with houses. So it's a hard situation, but I also want to recognize that most of the hill was platted to be houses a long, long time ago, and that also affects how I see the situation.
Thank you. So Todd, at process-wise, we just had a vote that perhaps was just because the motion itself was unclear. So what do we do to redo the vote without having to come back and do another, what we did with Commissioner Kula? And we know that took us hours to figure that one out. But I think it would just be, I restate the motion and then we have the vote.
I think Commissioner Bershauer corrected her vote and it's unanimous and will be reflected that way in the written decision. If you want to revote, you're free to do so, but I don't believe it's necessary.
Okay.
That's fine. Ken Friday's laughing at us.
He's been through this before.
This has happened before, and Stephanie was reminding me this happened once at a planning commission hearing on a pretty important vote. And so, yeah.
It's like,
remember that.
A good story.
Right. It's like, hey, what did I just vote for?
Yes.
But I'm very pleased it got resolved here rather than go on and be a problem later. So I'm very happy it got resolved right away.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your work on that. So Todd, what are we looking at here? We're just basically looking at findings in 2 weeks.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for that clarification. So we'll go ahead and we've closed that public hearing, move on to item K, which is announcements, and thanks, Ken and Stephanie. Announcements, do we have any announcements?
The only one, Chair, that I was going to mention was that as the greenhouse gas program executive orders come through the rules advisory committees, AOC is going to be presenting to the membership, to the steering committee from DLCD and DEQ. And so I just want to put that out there. I'll be present for both of those, and I'm happy to report back to all of you if you're not able to make it to those.
Absolutely, appreciate that.
And one of them is a particular note to us because it's about landfill gas. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Kula, when are those scheduled for?
I need to look at my email. And so if you have something else, I'll pull it up.
Sure. I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our graduates. It's graduation week this week and next week. So it's been a tough year for them. Probably not as bad as last year, but still tough nonetheless. So congratulations to all of our high school seniors.
Yes, and we do have some staff who were at graduations this week. So congratulations, parents, on getting your kids to the next level. And I just want to add that I was asked to write a letter of support for the city of Carleton in support of a grant application to the Oregon Transportation and Growth Management Program to do an update for their TSP. And I asked what the process was, and the process was I could send the letter, just a generic letter, which I went ahead and did, and that I can go ahead and send to anyone. Basically, I wrote to the ODOT contact saying that this would just allow the city to do more focused transportation planning, safer routes to schools, varied recreational opportunities, just a basic support of the funding to update their TSP. So I've got that letter, I can forward that, but I don't have anything else. There was a rally at the Capitol. I was very happy to take part in yesterday with Senators Linthicum and Hurd and Thatcher, with a number of doctors, a number of local doctors, and lots of folks from Oregonians for Medical Freedom and Children's Health Defense, talking about a rally basically for those who've suffered during the last year and support for the various choices that people make medically. So I'll be putting some information on Facebook and also some contact information for folks who'd like to be in touch. And I think we've got AOC, we've got legislative next week. Legislative Committee, and also HHS is this afternoon. So if there's nothing else, Commissioner Kula?
Yes, I found it. I just wanted, I wouldn't have interrupted you, but I did want to let Commissioner Berschauer know that it's the committee, the subcommittee who will be hearing about the landfill gas program is tomorrow from 1 to 3, and I can forward that on to you if you haven't.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, and look forward to one or both of you reporting back so that we can get an idea of what's going on. Commissioner Huffer. No.
I just wanted to really quick, just a reminder that we have a number of budgetary items that are going to be coming up over the next 2 agendas. Next week will be the hearing and adoption for both the Cove Orchard and the Extension Service budgets. And then we also have the public hearing for the county budget next Thursday as well. With that one's done a little bit different. We do the public hearing and then we come back a week later for the actual budget adoption. So I just wanted to highlight that we have some very busy with this for the next couple of weeks for some budget adoption items in both closing out the current year budget and then getting things ready to go into the new budget year effective July 1. So just wanted to put that reminder out there, and more information to come next week.
Okay, well, thank you all. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll go ahead and adjourn. See you next week.